Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. The movie starts in 1984 at a weapons fair, where a young man, the main character, appears. Through the events, his name is Rick, and he's asking the seller about a Russian Kalashnikov. The seller laughs and hands him an Egyptian Kalashnikov, claiming it's Russian and costs $200. But Rick tells the seller it's not Russian. The seller responds that he knows what he's selling, and if Rick isn't buying, he should go grab a cold drink. Rick then calls his father, who steps in and confirms that the Kalashnikov is Egyptian. The seller threatens to call security and throw them out, but the father retorts, saying he'll tell security that the seller is trying to sell a Kalashnikov to a 14-year-old boy. Frightened, the seller offers to sell it for $150. The father agrees but takes 2 Kalashnikovs instead of 1. The seller complains about losing money, but the father insists it's better to lose some than be out of work altogether. Rick also spots a pistol he likes and says he'll take it too, and they leave with the pistol. As they drive off, it's revealed they live in Detroit. Rick asks his father why they haven't left, especially since he always calls it a terrible place. His father responds, saying that a lion can't leave its den. He then tells Rick to check the back seat, asking what he sees. Rick says it's a video player, but his father explains it's more than that, it's their future. He tells Rick that someday they'll open a video game store. Not just one store, but many. At this point, the movie is based on a true story. The father then suggests they go pick up Rick's sister and get some custard, but when they reach home, they see a car, and Rick's dad asks if it's Ty's car. It's revealed Ty is Rick's sister's boyfriend. The father gets very angry, grabs his gun, and goes inside to find his daughter, Dawn, with her boyfriend, apparently on drugs. He tells her he won't let her ruin her life, kicks Ty out, and tells Dawn to get dressed so they can go out. But Dawn refuses, calling him the worst father ever and running after her boyfriend. Her father prevents her from leaving, while her boyfriend drives off quickly. At the same time, her boyfriend's car nearly hits the grandparents' car as they pull up, living across from Rick's family. Rick's father reassures them that everything is fine and they can leave, but the grandfather gets out to see what's going on. A heated argument breaks out between Rick's sister and their father. She tells him she hates him and accuses him of being a failure, which is why their mother left him, not because he was abusive, but because he couldn't succeed. The grandfather tries to intervene, telling her not to talk to her father that way, but Rick's dad asks him to go inside. The grandmother then steps in, advising the grandfather to leave them alone, and tells their son, Rick's dad, to help his father carry things inside. Rick working on customizing the Kalashnikov, adding a silencer. His father explains that this makes their product unique. Later, Rick is woken up by his sister, who tells him she's planning to run away and gives him a contact number, asking him not to share it with their father. Rick warns her that her boyfriend isn't a good person, but she replies that their father is just as bad. Her boyfriend waits outside to pick her up, and while their father sees her sneaking out, he does nothing to stop her. Rick riding his bike and arriving at a small location. A man and a woman are watching the place closely, and they're undercover police officers. Rick enters and starts talking with a group of young men, all of whom are black and members of the Kari gang, who are known drug dealers. They ask Rick what he wants, and someone calls out for "white boy," indicating Rick. He tells them he wants to make a deal. This is Rick's father is actually in the illegal arms trade. Rick shows them the modified Kalashnikov with a silencer, explaining that each one costs $1,500, but he's willing to sell it for $1,000 since they're new customers. The gang agrees and makes the purchase. One of the gang members mentions that they're hosting a party that night and invites Rick to join. He attends the party, where he talks to the guy who invited him. He mentions that the mayor's niece, Cassie, is also at the party, and it's revealed that Johnny, the gang leader, has feelings for her. The next morning, Rick wakes up to find 2 police officers questioning his father about selling weapons. Rick comes downstairs to see what's going on. The officers ask him about the group of young men he met with, revealing that they're part of a notorious, unknown gang. When shown a photo of the gang leader, Rick pretends not to recognize him, and it turns out these are the same undercover officers who had been watching him. Rick's father steps in, telling the officers to leave. Later, Rick has become friends with some members of the gang. He finds a large teddy bear thrown in the trash and decides he'll give it to his sister as a gift. Meanwhile, the police approach Rick again, and the female officer asks him to get in the car. Rick questions why, and she says someone wants to speak with him. This person, named Jackson, works in the drug enforcement unit. They take Rick out for a burger and ask if he's ever used drugs. Rick denies it, and when he asks about his sister, he becomes upset, trying to leave the car. Jackson grabs him and is about to hit him, but the female officer stops him. She then shows Rick a picture of the gang leader, explaining that he was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head and that they recovered the weapon but don't know who killed him. The officers ask if his father's weapon was legally purchased or from an unlicensed fair. They want Rick to help them by pretending to buy drugs for his sister so they can trace the dealers. Rick agrees, but only if they give him $300. Before he goes, he tries to take a gun with him, but they tell him not to bring any weapons and confiscate it. Rick then heads to the location to buy drugs, allowing the police to discover the dealer's whereabouts. Rick returns home and finds his father asleep, so he hides the money from him. Rick starts hanging out with one of the gang members, and they go together to a suit shop to buy outfits for Johnny's wedding to Cassie, the mayor's niece. Later, back at home, Rick gets ready, and his father asks if he can join, but Rick tells him it's an invite-only event. At the wedding, Rick sees a man standing with Johnny and asks his friend about him. He learns that the man is Art Dirk, a well-known drug dealer. Boo goes over to greet Art, and Cassie notices Rick, approaching him to chat. She tells him that Johnny is too focused on business, even on their wedding day, compliments Rick's sharp look, and then leaves. After the wedding, Rick and the gang are driving when they see two girls, one of whom is Brenda, Rick's school friend. They invite her to join them, and they all head to a drive-in movie. Rick spends time with Brenda, talking and enjoying the evening together. Meanwhile, he continues his undercover work with the police, who offer him $4,000 to sell drugs. Rick agrees, makes the sale, and hides the money from his father. By 1985, Rick's father is selling weapons on the street and happens to see Rick in a police car. Suspicious, he returns home and searches Rick's room, finding a box with cash hidden under the bed. When Rick gets home, his father is waiting and confronts him about seeing him in a police car. Rick explains that he's working with the police to keep his father from being jailed, but his father argues that he shouldn't have agreed to it, even under threat of arrest. Rick then notices the box of money his father found and accuses him of snooping through his things. His father reveals that he found $9,782 in the box, questioning how a 15-year-old could have that kind of money without his dad knowing. Their argument escalates, and Rick sarcastically says his father should thank him. His father slaps him, and Rick, frustrated, tells him to keep the money, claiming he'll need it more for the video game store he dreams of opening. Upset by his father's behavior, Rick leaves the house, taking the teddy bear he found earlier to give to his sister. Rick meets his sister at a cafe, where he notices she doesn't look well. He urges her to come back home, but she refuses, asking what's going on with him. Suddenly, someone steals their car and they chase after the thief, firing shots, but he escapes. They're then arrested for firing a gun in public. At the station, Rick encounters the officers he's been working with, who inform him that he's facing charges of attempted murder and possession of a firearm. They assure him that they'll ensure the arresting officer doesn't show up at court, so the charges will be dropped. Rick returns home with his father, where they meet his grandfather, who's angry and asks him to get out of the car. Rick's father agrees, supporting his father's frustration, but Rick insists he didn't steal his grandfather's car. He only borrowed it, and then it got stolen. Rick tells his father he understands how he feels, especially now that his sister is gone. Rick decides he has to bring her back and heads to the gang's place to ask for their help. In a private room, Rick, Boo, and Johnny discuss the incident at the cafe. Rick reassures them that he didn't mention their names, but Johnny confronts him, saying he knows Rick has been taking drugs from them and selling them on his own. He warns Rick that the FBI has started monitoring their operations. Johnny gives Rick a choice: either sell under his supervision or cut ties to avoid any consequences if the gang gets busted. Later, the gang is at a bar, where Leon, a gang member, tells Johnny he has front-row tickets for an upcoming wrestling match featuring Tommy Harns. They travel to Las Vegas to attend the match, but Johnny gets upset when they're seated far from the ring, feeling embarrassed in front of his wife and the gang. During the match, Tommy loses, adding to Johnny's frustration. Afterward, at the bar, someone mocks Johnny for not securing ringside seats, leading Johnny to fight him until others manage to separate them. Meanwhile, Leon leaves his house, leaving his nephews behind. Suddenly, masked men shoot up the house, and one of his nephews, DeMeo, is fatally wounded. Rick, who is with his grandmother watching TV, sees the news about the attack and realizes it's drug-related. He returns home, but his father mistakes him for an intruder and nearly shoots him. Rick explains he's searching for his hidden gun, which his grandmother had hidden. Rick's father then shares that he traveled a long distance and met a Jewish girl there, revealing this after noticing Rick wears the Star of David. However, Rick doesn't fully grasp his father's meaning, and his father criticizes Rick's friends, calling them failures and naive. Rick defends his friends, saying they aren't poor or taking money from their fathers. They even support them financially. Rick returns to the gang's place, where Johnny is on the phone with someone who warns him to hide all his weapons because they're being closely watched. Johnny realizes the Carey gang was responsible for the attack on Leon's house and orders his men to stay alert, as their families might be in danger too. Angered, Rick leaves, but the police stop him, wanting to talk about DeMeo's death. Rick dismisses them, saying he's done working for them, and walks away. The next day, Rick is living with his grandparents after the argument he had with his father. He sees his father getting into a car and approaches him, saying he agrees to go back to school. However, he notices that his father has a lot of weapons with him. The father explains that a man left a goldfish with the weapons and that he needs to get rid of it. Rick goes inside the house to check on the fish, and at the same time, a gang member named Nag comes to see him. Nag sees the fish and asks about it, but suddenly he shoots Rick, apologizing as he does so. The father in the hospital as the police arrive. He asks who did this and learns that it was a member of the Carey gang. He becomes furious and vows to kill them all. Rick's sister arrives at the hospital and sees her brother in surgery. It's revealed that the father has been monitoring the gang. The next day, Rick wakes up and talks to his sister, who is sitting with him. A police officer comes to check on him, bringing gifts and asking who in the gang did this. He doesn't respond, and she tells him it doesn't matter because they have arrested the entire gang. Rick goes home with his father, expressing excitement about sleeping in his own bed again. He asks his father if his sister has returned home, but his father replies that she hasn't, and it seems like she has left the house. His grandmother has left him a gift on the stairs. Rick tells his father that everything will get better, but first, he needs to recover. As they enter the house, he asks his father if he can go back to school, but his father insists that it won't be possible after being shot, and that the school sees him as a danger to the other students. He mentions that there are gun shows they could attend, and Rick agrees. In 1986, Rick wakes up to the sound of knocking and opens the door to find a child named Ricky. Ricky tells him that his sister has given birth to his child, and Rick is surprised to learn that the mother is Brenda. He hasn't seen her in a long time. The child mentions that the baby looks like him, and they find out the baby's name is Keisha. At that moment, Rick's father arrives, and Ricky tells him he is now a grandfather. Rick's father encourages him to be a man and talk to his sister about returning. They visit Brenda, and Rick is happy to see his niece. His father expresses his excitement about being a good father and shares his dreams of opening a video game store. Rick, however, feels that things won't change and suggests they deal drugs together. His father refuses, saying he doesn't want to lose him like he lost his sister. Rick insists he won't get lost and explains how he used to sell drugs for little money, but now he can help his father make more. Eventually, his father agrees. Rick then goes to work with Art Dirk, the drug dealer from the gang leader's wedding, and starts dealing drugs himself. They try to bring Brenda back home, but she refuses to return. Her father forcibly takes her back, trying to keep her away from drugs. Brenda struggles, but eventually calms down. They bring her a TV to keep her entertained. Rick starts hiding drugs in suites to avoid getting caught, and they successfully form a drug-dealing gang. By 1987, they have made a lot of money, and Brenda has recovered enough to be released from her confinement. They now have a designated place for making drugs and hiding them in suites. Brenda is living with them, and Rick tells her he'll go out with friends if she wants to join, but she declines, saying she promised their grandmother she'd help with the suites. Rick goes out to a bar with his friends and runs into Cassie, who tells him that she's the reason he became like Johnny, and that she has helped him a lot, but now he's in prison, which makes her feel lonely. She mentions that the reason they are both outside of prison is their intelligence. They spend the night together, and when Rick returns home, he finds his father sitting outside, keeping an eye on Brenda at their grandmother's house to ensure she doesn't run away. Rick asks his father to come inside while he watches over Brenda, but his father refuses. Eventually, Rick goes to bed. The next day, the police raid their house and arrest Rick, who has 250 grams of drugs on him. This amount could lead to a life sentence. His father manages to secure a temporary release until the trial date and argues that it was the police who turned his son into a drug dealer. They confront the officers who had previously helped them, but the officers threaten his father, saying they could go to the press and make it public that they were the cause of the issues, but the police assure him that no one would believe him. They suggest that he find someone else to help him to reduce his sentence. They decide that Rick should go to Cassie for help. He tells her he has a large shipment and wants her to be his partner in exchange for her assistance, which would help mitigate his sentence. Although Rick feels conflicted about the idea due to his feelings for her, his father convinces him to go through with it. Cassie agrees to help and leaks information to the media about Rick's arrest and the involvement of the mayor's daughter, making it seem like he is the main reason behind it, leading to a life sentence for him. On the day of the trial, he is sentenced to life in prison. A vehicle takes him to a different city's prison where he undergoes processing and is placed in a maximum security cell. His father goes to talk to the police officers who had promised to help his son. The officer tells him they couldn't do anything and tried to persuade the judge, but he refused to help. His father confronts the officer, frustrated, and turns to another officer who informs him that there is no chance for help since his son was caught with such a large quantity of drugs. Meanwhile, Rick's father and sister visit him in prison, where he sees his daughter, a year old. Rick talks with his sister, expressing his sadness about being incarcerated. His sister shares that she tells her daughter about him every day and promises to keep showing her his pictures. Their father joins the conversation, and Rick confides that he feels dead inside the prison. His father reassures him that he is his favorite and only friend, prompting Rick to cry. The visit concludes, and the film ends with a note that Rick served 30 years in prison, while everyone else, including members of the gang, were released before him. His father passed away in 2014. Rick's daughter grew up, got married, and became a mother of two. Throughout his time in prison, he successfully maintained a relationship with his daughter, feeling immense joy upon his release and becoming the first non-violent offender to receive a life sentence. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button to get more new